today known as Turkey. In an attempt to unravel the mysteries surrounding their burial practices and establish a pattern, my research has been based on 23 years of archive reports and the research of those who actually worked at the site. Almost 10,000 years ago, solitary prehistoric hunter-gatherers came together and formed a settlement on a lush alluvial plain in central Anatolia. The settlement, known today as Çatalhöyük, its people lived for over a millennium in mud brick houses built one on top of the other. But what researchers know today is relatively little compared to what remains. Today, the site of Çatalhöyük is literally translated as fort mound. It's a tell site, which is an archaeological term for a mound created through generations of human occupation. It consists of two mounds, the east mound and the west mound. The east mound is Neolithic, the west mound is Çatalhöyük, and this is the path that comes up to the north or south, and obviously runs next to each mound. I'm focusing only on the Neolithic east mound. The site of it today is a far cry from the verdant landscape of 10,000 years ago. The mound was discovered in 1958 by James Mellaart and subsequently excavated from 1961 to 1965. Unfortunately, the site then lay fallow and deteriorated until excavations began again in 1993. The mound is 34 acres in area, 23 meters high, and is classified as a megasite, which is a classification reserved for communities over 20 acres. The estimated population was anywhere from 3,500 to 8,000 people at any one time. The occupation of the East Mound is dated from 7,400 BC to 6,000 BC during the heart of the Neolithic Revolution, a time about 10,000 years ago when hunters and gatherers settled down into villages and produced food, which meant the domestication of animals and crops and led to economic and social changes. This is the whole of the mound there. This is the south area where Mellaart originally excavated, and this is the dig house today. And here and off-site, they've had some other excavations, but as you can see, there's still quite a bit to go. It's a 25-year project from 1993. The stratification levels run from 0 to 12, with level 6 having both an A and B. And recently, in 2001, they published material dating 5 new pre-levels. Pre-level 12, A through E, which gives evidence of human activities such as bin dumps and quarrying, but no structures. The pre-levels represent 300 to 500 years of human activity. It's important because by studying these activity levels versus occupation levels, we're seeing the very moment in time when nomadic people decided to become sedentary. Today, the site is located on the Konya Plain in modern-day Turkey. The Konya Plain is the largest alluvial plain in Turkey, 10,000 square kilometers. This is the Konya Plain. There's Çatalhöyük. At its time of discovery, it was the largest known prehistoric settlement in the Near East. Since the 1960s, earlier sites and towns have been discovered in central and eastern Anatolia, as large or larger than Çatalhöyük. And there's now proof that domestication of crops and animals were well underway before the habitation of Çatalhöyük. However, it remains distinctive. What makes it distinctive? It's the first time that we see wall paintings and murals on man-made walls. And also, it's distinctive in its artwork because of the amount and sophistication of the art. This is a picture of an experimental house that they have on site that they've built. And it's basically a laboratory for the researchers where they can exercise theories about how the plaster was made, how burials were dug, how they did the murals, cooking, all of it. It's their off-site site laboratory. It's also distinctive because of the tightly packed buildings. The rooftop access is through ladders down into the interior. It's the first time that we see domestication outside of the Levant and Mesopotamia areas. And it's distinctive for its construction, using lime-based plaster poured from surrounding lake murals to surface the walls and floors. This plaster needs constant maintenance and resurfacing, which, ironically, is the reason the wall art is so well preserved today. Ian Hodder compares it to the rains of rose on a tree. And this is another view of the experimental house. And the burials in the house actually would be underneath these platforms and some in the floor. And those are another reason why it's distinctive for the intramural burials, which are graves within the confines of the settlement, which is largely unknown before the discovery of Çatalhöyük. It's also unique for what is not found. There's no known central administrative structure, no streets, no special community buildings, and no special rooms or buildings for burials. And lastly, it's unique because of Dr. Ian Hodder. He is the Dunleavy Family Professor at Stanford University. He's been directing excavations since 1993 under the umbrella of the British Institute of Archaeology in Ankara. His reflexive approach to excavations here at the site is trailblazing. His reflexive methodology means that whereas Mellaart originally interpreted the data on his own and presented it as the truth or fact, Hodder, rather, is producing theories telling the methods about how he and his team, the Catalhoyuk Research Project, came to the theories and leaving it open for different interpretations by other experts in other disciplines. He also brings researchers from other disciplines directly into the trenches to interpret the context of the finds on the spot. Anthropologists, theologians, philosophers, natural scientists, etc. They all work there researching. Hodder says that Catalhoyuk can be described as an necropolis as much as a settlement because other excavations have not produced the density of burials found at Çatalhöyük. We now know that other Neolithic sites, for example, had already evolved from these types of burials. For instance, special treatment of skulls declines in the pre-pottery Neolithic beat after the 8th century. And later stages of settlements, such as Çatalhöyük, no burial evidence is found, making researchers believe that burial became extramural by this time. And in Neolithic Thessaly, burials moved from in the houses to in between the houses, and some people by this point were even being cremated. Mellaart describes some of the buildings he found as shrines. They have more elaborate artwork, installations, and architectural decoration, and had a higher quantity of burials than average homes. It's because of his interpretations of the dwellings and murals that the prevailing theory of that burial at Çatalhöyük for decades was exccarnation or sky burial. Exccarnation refers to the practice of leaving the corpse exposed to be defleshed by birds of prey, in this case it was thought vultures. The first mural shown here, Mellaart interpreted as charnel houses, which are special structures in which the dead would be exposed. And these are what he described as four gables, with columns in between, open and exposed areas where the bodies would be laid. You can see it looks like animal beards scavenging. And he felt that these were depictions of skulls, which were more evidence of these being charnel houses. This is Shrine 8 of Level 7, which shows vultures swooping down on headless figures. It's important to note, however, that the burials associated with this mural, meaning found directly below it, all have their heads intact. And these are the types of murals which are found all over in various rooms in Çatalhöyük. The burials here in this platform are what they're talking about, how their heads intact. And this is found in Shrine 21 of Level 7, which is the shrine which would be directly below the one that we just saw in the stratification. So it was one shrine supposedly built above the other. And here you can see what he interpreted. This was the headless body, the birds of prey, and this is another human warding them off with a sling. There's a new theory that upon closer examination of the murals shows the beaks of the vultures are aimed at the position where the heads would have been, but they're not shown picking the other flesh. The suggestion is that these murals are simply symbolism for the association between the vultures and death, which was a recurring theme in Neolithic cultures throughout Turkey and the Middle East, rather than depicting the actual excavation. And you can see in this one the bird legs are quite different. They're actually bird legs instead of these human legs, which we saw in the other vulture murals. And lastly, this is a detail of an odd mural that no one knows quite how to interpret. It's a bearded face and head, separated from its torso with some other body parts. It was done in red ochre, and it appears, even though it's hard to see this black and white detail, it's interpreted as blood dripping, but nobody really knows how to interpret this headless drawing. It's important to say that there has been no evidence of excavation or disarticulation by vultures found at Çatalhöyük. However, it is possible that some of the bodies were exposed, and I'll talk about that shortly. There are at least 4 types of burials. The first that was also controversial because it's the most misinterpreted. The body shows evidence of having been exposed or interred in an initial setting for a period of time, then moved to its final resting place. And you'll see more illustrations like this done by the site illustrator for the 2005-2006 season, John Slaughter. The next type of burial are primary single burials. This is from Building 1. That means that all the bones are present, including certain floating bones, like the patella and the hyoid. They indicate a fully fleshed, intact burial. The importance of the presence of these small bones is that they aren't usually found or tend to be left behind when a skeleton has been moved. We have primary multiple burials. It's the same as a primary single, but 2 or more people have been placed intentionally into the same grave cut. And lastly, we have multiple disturbed burials. Burials which were probably primary at one time or secondary, but then when they were interred, they were moved aside later to make room for a new burial, or possibly in the process of retrieving skeletal parts. There's really only one rule found to be static throughout burials at Çatalhöyük. That's that no pottery is ever found in a burial. There are some other general rules, however. The body is usually flexed and bound in this manner beneath the platforms. And other than that, every other factor in burial is a variation. From the direction, orientation of the body, the presence or not of grave goods, types of binding, whether it's mat, basket, or other textile, the material used for binding, even the portion of the plant used for the weaving of the textile. For example, adult burials have mats and baskets woven only from the leaves and stems of certain plants, while neonates sometimes have baskets woven with the flowering portion of the plant. All structures excavated here in Çatalhöyük are now determined to be, in fact, dwellings. No matter how elaborate or how many burials discovered, there are no shrines. Dwellings serve as the center for all activity. Processing food, brick making, obsidian, bone point, and bead production. There's even a suggestion that covered animal pens near homes meant domestic, individual ownership of animals versus communal. And as well, each house had individual storage. Within the dwelling, there seems to be a distinction between clean and dirty areas. Clean areas will represent the north areas of the home. They'll be plastered white. The dirty areas are the southern oven-related areas where food production and other domestic production take place, hearth areas. Some examples of some of the goods that have been found, just to give you an idea of how the clean and dirty distinctions work. Figurines and pottery are always found in dirty areas, hidden deposits. Obsidian is found in both. This is an obsidian dagger with a bone handle. It's found in both clean and dirty because it's produced in the dirty area and its finished product buried in a clean area. Same with baskets and bone artifacts. They're produced in the dirty area but found in clean areas as grave goods. And burials are usually clean, always clean areas for adults. But neonates and infants could be found buried both in the clean and the dirty areas. Burial is the best evidence that we have that some houses were clearly more dominant. Peter Pels coined the term history houses, while Naomi Hamilton refers to them as lineage houses. Either way you go, the defining features means that it was rebuilt over a longer period of time, and it's more elaborate in symbolism. The average number of burials found in the standard dwelling could be 8, and many have no burials, while a history house have as many as 30, up to 62 is the most found in one home. That's really one. Some houses were connected by crawl holes, and history houses, we think, were used for communal purposes, the burials, the feasting for the group of family relations, births, etc. They even have murals. We know that they have group activities. Murals show group activities such as hunting, festivities. In spite of the vast quantities of burials found, it doesn't match the estimated population. It's estimated that at least a third of the population could be buried off-site, and that is where researchers expect to find evidence of exccarnation depicted in the murals if it in fact exists. The off-site Hillful Trench area found disarticulated human remains mixed with animal remains, similar to a midno. Also, the young male demographic seems to be underrepresented and may be explained by the suggestion that they more often died away from the settlement, war, hunting, that type of thing. We're going to talk about building one for a little bit as the paradigm of what is found there, so you can have an understanding of the different demographics. In building one, which is a history house with 62 burials found, there were burials in the northwest platform, the east central platform, and the floor area, north central. There were also 7 foundation burials. From the east central platform, which is here, 15 individuals were found. 7 were not able to be sexed, but 5 were males, 2 females, and 1 possible male. The ages ranged from 10 years old to elderly, but mostly adults. There were 3 complete primary burials. Grave goods were mostly bone and wood. In the northwest platform, 26 individuals were found. It was mostly a mass of multiple disturbed burials. 4 adults, 3 of those were male, 2 were elderly, all basically complete. The remaining individuals were all infants and juveniles, ages neonate to around 10 years old. Only 8 were complete, the rest were skulls or other fragments. The grave goods were beads, stone pendants, and shells, and there were wall paintings and murals associated with this platform. On the north central floor area, which is here, were burials found that would be during the later phase of occupation. 19 individuals, 3 elderly females, all basically complete. The rest were juveniles up to 10 years old, which were mostly complete, late adolescent. There was one very interesting grave. There were 5 individuals, only vertebral columns and ribs were found and some other bones, but they had evidence of surface modification and staining. The suggestion is that they were exposed outdoors and defleshed prior to their burial in this house. The humerus of one of the skeletons had 2 cuts in it, with other bone fragments embedded in the cuts, which suggests that a bone tool was used for the cutting. It was accompanied by a primary infant burial, which was fully articulated and had no grave goods. The foundation burials were 7 skeletons, all covered by the floor, so these would be buried prior to the house being built up. There was an elderly male halfway on the west side of the room. This would be him here. He was wrapped in a textile. A mature female in the center north area with a neonate buried on her skull. 3 neonates at the base of the wall, where later a crawl space would be. This would become a southwest platform and would eventually be a dirty area. And a 9-month-old baby that was adjacent to the female. The point of me giving you all these demographics is to show that the higher number of neonates could signify the importance of being born in the house, lending to the history house theory. All burials here identify with the clan, so this would be a history house for a group of houses, and all their burials would be of that family. And there is some genetic evidence that suggests that each of the 3 burial areas shown on the slide before were actually 3 branches of the same familial group. The bones in the floor may indicate other relatives to the lineage group, for example, maybe the moss. The point is that there's no segregation of sexes, there's no distinction of age or gender, there's no evidence for social distinctions. Evidence shows that inhabitants of Çatalhöyük had an understanding of anatomy because of the surgical precision of disarticulated body parts. But very few people had their heads removed in comparison with other Neolithic sites of LouAnn, where the practice is more prevalent. This suggests that these individuals must have been special in some way. Only 6 of the 350 skeletons found up to 2010 of the current project had their heads removed. The focus of skull removal at Çatalhöyük seems to be more individualized rather than generalized. There must have been a memory of where certain burials were in order to reopen the grave, dig down and retrieve the skull from the other parts. We don't know. Were they marked in some way? Was there some sort of record keeping, even though they had no written language? The evidence that the status of the skulls must have been known prior to burial, and that these were given special treatment during burial, such as a particular arrangement in the grave to make it easier to retrieve the skull later. Skulls may have been circulated for some time before being deposited in either an abandonment or a foundational context of a new building phase for a home. Burials and foundations may be a way to begin a new lineage home, such as in Building 17, a skull was found at the base of a supporting post of the house. We'll talk a little bit about a couple of noteworthy burials. Okay. In Building 49, there platform 1656 here, with the head and torso present, fully articulated, however the limbs were missing. The perfect articulation of the remains, the presence of the floating bones as we discussed earlier, suggests that the limbs were removed while the body was flesh, but no cut marks were found, again suggesting surgical knowledge and care. In Building 60, there was a body found, a mother with a fetus still in her birth canal here. The fetus was slowly articulated, the mother's head was missing. It used to be thought that there were never any animal remains ever mixed with human remains at Çatalhöyük, and then they excavated this, which was an entire lamb laid with its legs extended out next to this male body. This is an interesting burial, which body was packed with the excrement of a small carnivore, probably a weasel. This is an interesting body. It was flexed, as it usually is, perfectly articulated with the primary burial. The legs were spread. It was wrapped in a textile, and this plank was laying over it. This is the phytolith, which is evidence, it's the fossil of the textile that was used. You can see the body's perfectly articulated, except for, of course, the missing head. And this is the most spectacular burial yet found at Çatalhöyük. It's building 42, a woman, perfectly articulated skeleton, embracing a plastered skull. It's unusual for several reasons. It's the only example of a plastered skull found at Çatalhöyük, even though the practice is prevalent throughout the ceramic Neolithic of LouAnn, Mesopotamia. It was rare in central Anatolia. There's only 4 others known in the region. The burial goods included with this was a leopard claw pendant, the only remains of a leopard found on site, in spite of the fact that there's many murals showing leopard skins being worn. The burial was foundational, or a mid-known, that suggests that they couldn't build over an ancestral building. Maybe they would build over an ancestor. And there's no known connection between the skull and the woman. However, the skull shows evidence of being plastered and painted several times, supporting the circulation theory. And there's an artist drawing, and I'll skip to my conclusion, which is it may seem as though I failed to establish a pattern of burial at Çatalhöyük. However, I presented this individualization of the community discussed earlier that also applies to burials. Though they lived together in a settlement, there's no evidence that the people were cohesive outside the small corporate family groups. The variations we see are due to the fact that there seems to be no known form of central religion, symbolism, infrastructure, or administration. Çatalhöyük may be even more critical than we realize. We're not just seeing the broader picture of the Neolithic Revolution, but like a stopwatch, we're seeing a split-second view of